The world was once split into two big groups. This was the Cold War. It was not a war with soldiers fighting on a battlefield. Instead, it was a long and tense standoff. On one side was the United States and its allies. They believed in democracy. They believed in a free market. This meant people could own businesses and make their own choices. On the other side was the Soviet Union, also known as the USSR. It was a huge country made of many smaller republics. They believed in communism. The government controlled almost everything. It owned the farms and the factories. It told people where to work and what to do. This was a deep disagreement about how to live. These two superpowers were like two giants staring at each other. They never fought directly. A direct war would have been too dangerous. Both sides had nuclear bombs. These weapons were so powerful they could destroy the entire world. A war with these bombs would mean the end of everything. So instead of fighting, they competed in other ways. They competed to build more weapons. This was called the arms race. They competed to see who could go to space first. This was the space race. They tried to get other countries to join their side. The world watched, feeling the tension between these two powerful nations. The Soviet Union built a barrier around itself and its allies in Eastern Europe. This was not always a real wall. It was an idea. It was called the Iron Curtain. It separated the communist East from the democratic West. People in the East could not easily travel to the West. They could not get information from the outside world. Their governments were controlled by the leaders in Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union. For decades, this division seemed permanent. It shaped the lives of millions of people who lived behind this invisible but very real barrier, cutting them off from different ideas and opportunities. This long period of tension lasted for many years. It started after World War II ended in 1945. It continued through the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and most of the 80s. Generations were born and grew up knowing only this divided world. They saw the world as a game of us versus them. The United States represented freedom and capitalism. The Soviet Union represented control and communism. This long, cold conflict defined global politics. It created a constant fear of a big war. It was a time of spies, secrets, and a deep distrust that poisoned international relations for more than 40 years. Inside the Soviet Union, things were not as strong as they looked. The country had big problems. One of the biggest was its economy. The government planned everything. It decided how many shoes to make. It decided how much bread to bake. But this system did not work well. There were often shortages of basic goods. People stood in long lines for hours to buy food or clothes. The stores had empty shelves. The factories were old and not efficient. While the West had new technology and many products, the Soviet Union was falling far behind. Life was hard for ordinary people. The government was another major problem. It was not a democracy. There was only one political party, the Communist Party. The leaders in Moscow made all the decisions for the entire country. People had no say in who ruled them. If you disagreed with the government, you could be in serious trouble. You might lose your job. You might be sent to prison. There was no freedom of speech. Secret police, like the KGB, watched people closely. This created a society filled with fear. People could not trust their neighbors. They could not speak their minds freely, even in their own homes. Personal freedom was almost non-existent. The government controlled what people could read or watch. Newspapers, books, and television shows were all filled with propaganda. They only showed the good side of communism and the bad side of the West. It was illegal to listen to foreign radio stations. Artists and writers had to create work that glorified the state. If they didn't, their work was banned. People wanted more. They wanted the freedom to think for themselves. They wanted to learn about the world. They were tired of being told what to believe and how to live every single day. The Soviet Union was also spending too much money on its military. The arms race with the United States was very expensive. Building tanks, planes, and nuclear missiles cost billions. This money could have been used to fix the economy. It could have been used to provide better housing or more food for the people. But the leaders believed they had to be strong to compete with America. This focus on military power drained the country's resources. It made the other problems, like the weak economy and the shortages of goods, even worse. The foundation of the Soviet Empire was cracking under the immense pressure. In 1985, a new leader came to power in the Soviet Union. His name was Mikhail Gorbachev. He was different from the old leaders. He was younger and had new ideas. He saw the deep problems his country was facing. He knew that the Soviet Union could not continue on the same path. The economy was a disaster. The people were unhappy. The country was isolated from the rest of the world. Gorbachev believed that big changes were needed to save the system. He was not trying to end communism. He was trying to fix it and make it stronger for the future. He thought reform was the only way to survive. Gorbachev introduced two very important new policies. The first was called glasnost. This word means openness. For the first time in decades, the government allowed more freedom of speech. People could criticize the government without going to prison. Newspapers started to report on the country's problems honestly. They wrote about the long lines, the inefficient factories, and the mistakes of past leaders. This was a shocking change. Suddenly, the truth was being told. People could talk about things that were forbidden for years. It was like a window had been opened in a dark, closed room. The second policy was called perestroika. This word means restructuring. This was Gorbachev's plan to fix the broken economy. He wanted to change the way the government-controlled system worked. He allowed some small private businesses to open. He gave factory managers more control to make their own decisions. The goal was to make the Soviet economy more efficient and productive. He hoped these changes would bring more goods to the stores and improve people's lives. But changing such a huge and complex system was very difficult. The old ways were hard to break, and the reforms created new problems and confusion. These new policies were a huge gamble. Gorbachev hoped that by giving people a little freedom, they would support his efforts to reform communism. He thought that a more open and efficient Soviet Union would be a stronger one. But he underestimated what would happen when people got a taste of freedom. For years they had been silent. Now they could speak. They did not just want small changes. Many wanted big changes. They wanted real democracy. They wanted independence for their own republics. Gorbachev had opened the door, and now a flood of new demands and ideas was rushing through it, far beyond what he ever expected. Gorbachev's changes in Moscow had a massive effect across Eastern Europe. The countries there were also ruled by communist governments, controlled by the Soviet Union. When people in places like Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia saw glasnost happening, they were inspired. They began to demand the same freedoms for themselves. Huge protests filled the streets. People were no longer afraid. Gorbachev made a critical decision. He announced that the Soviet Union would not use its army to stop these protests. This was a huge change. In the past, Soviet tanks would have crushed any rebellion. Now, the people were on their own to decide their future. The most famous event happened in Germany. The country had been divided since World War II. East Germany was communist and West Germany was democratic. A massive concrete wall, the Berlin Wall, cut the city of Berlin in two. It was the most powerful symbol of the Cold War division. In November 1989, after massive protests, the East German government made a confused announcement about new travel rules. Crowds of people gathered at the wall. They demanded to be let through. The guards were overwhelmed and did not know what to do. Finally, they opened the gates. The wall had fallen. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a moment of pure joy. People from East and West Berlin climbed on top of the wall. They hugged, they cried, and they celebrated together. They used hammers and chisels to chip away at the concrete barrier that had separated families and friends for almost 30 years. The event was shown on television all over the world. It was a clear sign that the Cold War was ending. The Iron Curtain was collapsing piece by piece. One by one, the communist governments of Eastern Europe fell. They were replaced by new, democratic governments that held free elections. The Soviet grip on the region was broken forever. These events led to the end of the Soviet Union itself. The 15 republics that made up the USSR saw what was happening in Eastern Europe. They wanted their own independence too. Movements for freedom grew in Lithuania, Ukraine, Georgia, and elsewhere. Gorbachev's reforms had made him unpopular at home. Some thought his changes were too slow, while old communists thought he had gone too far. In August 1991, hardline communists tried to remove him from power in a coup, but it failed. By the end of the year, the republics had declared their independence. On Christmas Day 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned. The Soviet Union officially ceased to exist. The Cold War was over and the world map was redrawn.